As most of you are probably aware, once-in-a-lifetime winter weather is slamming the United States, reaching all the way down to Texas. A place that doesn't normally get this severe winter weather is now dealing with massive power outages, pipes are bursting, and, well, serious cold is risking people's lives. Other parts of the country are dealing with this as well. Over on the East Coast, there's a major winter storm slamming into everyone. The big news, for the most part, is that there's a power outage, a serious one in Texas. And this is mostly due to the fault of Texas for not winterizing their electrical grid. It's not about wind power. It's not about coal or natural gas. It's all of it. Texas was not prepared for this. Many have argued they should have been. Other places, like in Arkansas, for instance, are getting cold weather as well, but they've actually prepared. And a lot of people are saying you can't really blame Texas for not being ready for serious winter weather. That doesn't happen except for once in maybe 100 years. Well, the big story may be power outages. And now politically, Ted Cruz flying to Cancun. The one aspect of this that will likely affect all of you is the food shortages. This image I have displayed on the screen is from a CNN reporter saying that their mother went shopping in Houston and it is empty shelves. Food shortages are coming to Texas. And this is going to put many more people at risk. And I have been warning many people about the potential for this, but more importantly, food inflation. That's what's going to affect you in the long run. The government has been spending money like crazy, pumping dollars into the system because they shut everything down. And while many people have been warning against shutting down the economy because of what it'll lead to, it seems like many Democrats just did not care. Well, truth be told, Donald Trump was also calling for this stimulus and the printing of this money, and the Republicans said no. In the end, I don't think it matters all that much. Either food becomes more expensive or food doesn't exist. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw major food shortages. Stores were empty. In one instance, a food bank that was set up had people storm through the gates fighting over what little food there was. This is what happens when there's no COVID relief. Now, when they actually pump money into the system, what ends up happening is the economy may move to a certain degree, but then we are going to see massive inflation. The price of wheat is going up, and now you will likely see very, very high prices for groceries you normally buy. Now you probably can't. Included in the stimulus relief bill is a call for $15 an hour minimum wage. What that really means after all of this inflation, it doesn't matter how much you're earning hourly. I mean, it kind of does. You'll need a raise. That's what's scary. If the cost of milk is normally $3 for a half gallon or something to that effect, and then it doubles to $6, you're going to need more money to be able to buy the food you normally buy. A wage increase only offsets inflation. Now, I know that's one of the big arguments from the left, but don't believe that this wage increase in minimum wage is going to be some kind of relief. In fact, it's only a stopgap. Well, let's take a look at what's going on specifically with Texas, because this is scary, and I want everybody to pay attention to this. I sometimes will promote these food bins, and it's crazy to me. Many on the left mock the idea, and it is just the left, right? The right doesn't do it. They mocked the idea that sometimes there are storms, sometimes there are hurricanes, sometimes there are floods. I've never promoted this stuff saying, the world is ending, because I don't think it is. I just think sometimes it snows, you get stuck in your house, and you might need some extra food that's going to last you a little bit longer. Sometimes food expires. Maybe it makes sense to have something that doesn't. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to get access to exclusive content. We got a bonus episode with James O'Keefe. We set this up that in the event we get banned, there will still be somewhere our content exists. Being a member really does support the channel, but I am going to give a shout out to safeandreadymeals.com. Full disclosure, this is a sponsor spot. This does help support my work, but I am only promoting it now because I genuinely believe you need to understand what's going on. Texas, as I showed you, the stores have no food. There's no guarantees, okay? But go to safeandreadymeals.com. You'll get an excellent deal off of these food storage bins. They last up to 25 years. You put them in storage, you forget about them. You don't buy these things because the world is ending. You buy them because right now in Texas, a winter storm has shut down roads. It has disrupted the supply chain. And now people are going to the store and they can't find the goods they normally need. I'm not implying everyone's going to starve to death, but even with COVID, potential food inflation, there have been shortages, and you need to have something to keep you safe in the event that it rains. It's that simple. Sometimes there's a flood, the roads are shut down, they tell you to stay home for a few days. Do you have enough food, water, and supplies to last you in the event of an emergency? These videos and these photos coming out of Texas are absolutely crazy, man. There's one where someone's got a bathtub full of ice. Yeah, because they tell you to fill up your bathtub in an emergency so you have a ton of extra water. But what happens when the heat cuts out because there's no power? And then your home is freezing and you wake up in the morning to a giant block of ice in your bathtub. Apparently that actually happened to somebody. Check out safeandreadymeals.com. You can get these deals on these emergency food supplies. Again, not because the world's ending. You just put them in storage, you store them properly, and you forget about them. And then in the event you get trapped in one of these situations, at least you'll have some food. Here's the story from TexasTribune.org. Texas running out of food as weather crisis disrupts supply chain. They report the state's week of weather hell started with a deadly 133-car pileup outside of Fort Worth. A winter storm unlike any Texas has ever seen quickly followed. And 7 days later, millions are without power and reliable water. And now Texans are running out of food. From farm to table, freezing temperatures and power outages are disrupting the food supply chain that people rely on every day. Across the state, people are using up supplies they had stockpiled and losing more as items start to spoil in dark refrigerators. Some are storing the remaining rations in coolers outside, and trips to the grocery store often do little to replenish pantries. Again, it is a sponsor. Safe and Ready Meals is a sponsor, but seriously, look at what they're saying. People having their food spoil, and they have to go to the store, and they're not finding what they need. Quote, "It was out of meat, eggs, and almost all milk before I left," Crystal Porter, an Austin resident, said about our local Target, which she visited Monday. Lines were wrapped around the store when we arrived. Shelves were almost fully cleared of potatoes, meat, eggs, and some dairy. 2 days later, one of Porter's neighbors went to the same Target, and the store was completely out of food, with no sign of additional shipments arriving or employees restocking shelves. With grocery stores across the state shuttered for lack of power, supermarkets that remain open have seen supplies dwindle. Shortages that ripple over to food pantries that count on grocery store surplus to keep their own shelves stocked. Meanwhile, fruit and vegetable crops in the Rio Grande Valley have frozen over in what the produce news described as Valentine's Day produce massacre. School districts from Fort Worth to Houston have halted meal distributions to students for the next several days. And Texas Department of Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller said dairy farmers around the state are pouring $8 million worth of milk down the drain every day because they can't get it to dairies. Celia Cole, the CEO of hunger relief organization Feeding Texas, said that so far 8 food banks have asked the state for extra help feeding their communities. Several food banks affiliated with Feeding Texas have also started providing food supplies to emergency warming shelters in the state's major cities. Wednesday afternoon, the Central Food Bank of Texas canceled its deliveries scheduled for Thursday in Austin and Rockdale. Quote, "The food bank's fleet, equipment, facilities, and operations have been adversely impacted by the extremely low temperatures, and hazardous road conditions are hindering our staff and volunteers from getting to our buildings safely." The organization announced in a media alert, "These conditions are also keeping us from distributing food safely." That's what's happening in Texas. And many of you may be saying, "Tim, you said this is going to impact me." Yes. Not in the exact same way. But we do run the risk of what's called food inflation along with these shortages. In this story from NY360, price of wheat jumps, raising fear of food inflation. This is a more important subject in the long run. In the short term, the most important thing is to make sure the people of Texas are getting their food. But this is the stuff you need to pay attention to. Not everybody who's watching is going to be in Texas. And you need to understand what happens when this reaches you. I've already had friends talk to me because I've warned about this. They printed an insane amount of money. Look at this. This is the M1 money stock. And you can see at the beginning of last year, around January, there was just massive printing of money. It is around 60 or so, 70% of all US dollars printed in the span of a year. You realize this is very likely going to lead to massive inflation. So I've had friends telling me they used to go to the store and spend $100, $200 on groceries. The same amount of groceries is now costing them nearly double. And they were shocked. I went to one store. The price of milk was insane. I was surprised. And I wondered, are we really getting hit by this now so soon? It seems like it. Check this out. Wheat rose to a 6-year high in Chicago after a top exporter, Russia, said it's ratcheting up efforts to cool domestic food inflation by curbing grain exports. Russia said Friday that a new duty on shipments will rise even more than expected just a few weeks after being imposed in mid-February. And taxes will continue at some level after the current season ends in June. The government had announced an initial tax in December alongside a grain export quota after President Vladimir Putin demanded action following sharp increases in price for pantry staples. So this will have an impact. They say while other wheat shippers like Australia have bumper harvests, Russia plays a vital role in the global supply, and its grain will still be needed in the latter part of the season, said Andre Defoy, president of consultant Strategy Grains. Chicago wheat futures reached the highest since 2014 after the government announcement, and Paris milling wheat is set for the biggest weekly gain in 4 years. I'm not going to bore you with the finer points, but how much of your food is derived from wheat? A lot of it. How much wheat is used to feed livestock? I'd imagine, I don't know how much they actually use wheat for feeding livestock. I know corn and alfalfa, for instance, are heavily used. But if the wheat becomes more expensive, your Pop-Tarts become more expensive, your hot dog buns, your bread, and anything that contains wheat or wheat byproducts or gluten, it is going to jump in cost. Now, here we go from Bloomberg. The world will pay more for meat as food inflation deepens. They say the COVID-19 pandemic upended food supply chains, paralyzing shipping, sickening workers that keep the world fed, and ultimately raising consumer grocery costs around the globe last year. Now, farmers, especially ones raising cattle, hogs, and poultry, are getting squeezed by the highest corn and soybean prices in 7 years. It's lifted the cost of feeding their herds by 30% or more. To stay profitable, producers, including Tyson Foods, Inc., are increasing prices, which will ripple through supply chains and show up in the coming months as higher price tags for beef, pork, and chicken around the world. You know what that means? It means your Burger King, it means your Wendy's, your McDonald's, your Taco Bell, your KFC, your Arby's, whatever your choice of fast food is. It's going to cost them more for everything. Prices are going to go up across the board. People are then going to demand raises. It's just going to keep going. With the increase in cost of food comes an increase in cost of everything. Workers need to eat. And if a worker at a fast food chain who normally gets a discount and spends $6 on a meal at lunch now has to spend 8 or 9, they're going to say, this ain't enough money. If the workers need more money because they need to eat, the cost of services will go up. All of this will result in the value of your savings going down. Now, I'd imagine people without savings and people who are in debt probably don't care about that because, well, they're trying to get food now. But that's ultimately what's going to be the scariest thing. It's going to impact you. It's going to impact everyone. There is a risk of global food shortages due to COVID, and it's increasing, says UN envoy. This story from just the other day. How much of our time is spent bickering about dumb BS like Ted Cruz flying to Cancun? Meanwhile, did you even know this was happening? How many people didn't even click on this video because they think, who cares? Probably a lot. Would see this go by. Food shortages could impact you, and they're probably thinking, yeah, but can I dunk on Ted Cruz or AOC? Look, I get it, man. Politics are important. Arguing about what Ted Cruz is doing, I understand, and Cuomo especially. But do we get lost sometimes in not realizing what's happening all around us? Now, what if I were to tell you that we've already reached the point where citizens in some cities are storming the dumpsters to get what spoiled food they might be able to eat from a grocery store, and the police are coming out to fight off the crowds that are trying to raid dumpsters? You'd say, Tim, surely we're not there yet. Things haven't gotten that bad, right? From Oregon Live, Portland police officers guard Fred Meyer dumpsters face off with residents seeking discarded food. This is real. I guess because of the winter storm, people needed food. They tried raiding a dumpster and the police blocked them. First of all, dude, let the people eat their dumpster food. I'm not trying to rag on them. If people are that desperate and they need food from a dumpster, just let them have it. It's crazy to me. I remember a long time ago in Chicago, I saw a bagel shop and their dumpster had a padlock on it. They were worried that if they throw away their day-old bagels, which are still edible, but just not, they can be a little stale, people would just stop buying the bagels and go raid the dumpster for the fresh bagels. Maybe they're right, but it's insane that that's how our system works, that we make the food and throw it in the garbage to be completely destroyed and eaten by rats instead of letting a human being have it out of the dumpster. But more importantly, can you believe that we're actually at this point where this is happening in Oregon? They say workers at the Hollywood West Fred Meyer threw away thousands of perishable items because the store, like many others, had lost power in an outage brought on by the region's winter storm. Images on social media showed mountains of packaged meat, cheese, and juice, as well as whole turkeys and racks of ribs that had been tossed into two large dumpsters near the store. A few people gathered around 2:30 p.m. But within a few hours, people seeking food from the dumpsters began to report police officers showing up to guard the dumpsters. What is wrong with you? These cops. Man, to me, this is nuts. Look, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who will say that it is exploitative of me to promote emergency food supplies right now with what's going on in Texas and Portland and what may be coming with food inflation. I don't do that every day. I'm not going to scream in your face, a meteor is coming and you're all going to die. I'm just saying sometimes it snows, man. A snowstorm hit Portland, it hit Texas, and I genuinely believe we need to be ready for what may come in the future due to inflation. And more importantly, just the inclement weather. I also think, man, are we really in that dystopian nightmare where people have to confront cops to get food from the dumpster? Yikes, man. They say Morgan McNiff, a resident of the neighborhood, said employees were guarding the dumpsters when they showed up to get some of the discarded food. McNiff began to film the employees and reported staff members threatened to call the police on them for doing so. The store manager called police shortly thereafter, McNiff said, and McNiff began live streaming the interaction on Instagram. After that, other people started showing up and asking them, "Why are you guys guarding a dumpster?" About 15 people eventually gathered in an attempt to collect food. At that point, a dozen officers arrived at the scene. One officer wasn't wearing a mask and refused to put one on until a supervisor arrived and brought him one. I don't care about the mask. Neither Portland police nor the store spokesperson responded to a request for comment. An employee from the store said they couldn't comment. Juniper Simonis, an environmental biologist and data scientist who arrived to document the police presence, said officers showed up and threatened those on hand with arrest, at which point the crowd moved across the street. Let me make this clear for all of you. Power outage. Winter storm hits Portland. Portland and Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, doesn't normally get winter storms like this. It rains. So the store loses power and disposes of a ton of food. And hungry people, because we are in a crisis, sought out that food. And the police stopped them. In Texas, the stores are being stripped clean. Now listen, I showed you this already. Just look, for those that are listening and you can't see, since this graph goes back to 1975, there is a steady increase in the M1 money stock. Eventually around, it doubles a bit. By 1990, it's now around twice where it was in, 15 years earlier. We can see that the money supply actually goes down a little bit. Something happens around 2008. That was the financial crisis. We can see the trajectory actually spikes. The M1 money stock starts to go up much more rapidly. And then at the beginning of this year, we can see it skyrockets. The mass printing of money is going to hit everyone. Bloomberg reports inflation is coming. That might even be a problem. Upward pressure on prices is already easy to spot. And that's before the Democrats take over. That's right. Here we go. Let's rag on Democrats at least once in this food segment, right? Well, what Bloomberg is saying, when the Democrats were, voted in, when they won the Senate, people reacted by saying, here we go. They're going to mass print money. Inflation is going to hit. Surprise, surprise. Bitcoin hit 52,500 just the other day. I think it's probably still floating around the same spot, 51 or so. Bitcoin. Wow. 10 years ago, it was trading at less than 70 cents per Bitcoin. You could have bought when it was at $1, and you would have $500,000 right now, 10 years later, because the dollar is unstable. Inflation will hit, and it will impact everything. From Seeking Alpha, Federal Reserve Watch, inflation coming. Now, we're moving beyond food, mind you, but I think the food issue is principally what's the most important. Because if you don't eat, well, you die. Maybe you won't be able to buy that computer. Maybe you've been saving up for that new car. You can't. The cost's going to go way up. But if you can't afford milk or bread or meat, well, then you're in serious trouble. Summary from Seeking Alpha. Inflationary expectations are increasing and getting built into markets. The bond market has started to reflect Fed expectations. Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary and top advisor to President Obama, has come out in opposition to Biden's 1.9, I believe it's $1 trillion stimulus program, not billion, as inflationary. Commercial banks, they say billion though. Commercial banks already have 3.2 trillion in excess reserves. And with the Fed scheduled to purchase 120 billion in securities every month, there's going to be lots of money. Exactly where this money goes is the big question. It could flow into the circuit that supports economic activity, or it could primarily flow into the financial circuit. In the end, their 5-year inflationary expectations at the close of business on Friday were calculated to be right around 2.3%. 10-year expectations, 2.2. I'm not so sure it's going to be that low. I don't want to play crazy games and say that I know better than the economists and we're going to see hyperinflation. But I got to tell you something. I'm just some dude on the internet complaining about his feelings, huh? That's right. When I look at the mass printing of this money, it's never been done before. Look at this chart. Again, I just we've been tracking this for months. It's never happened before. Doesn't that imply we're going to see something we've never seen before? We have no idea what this will do. Food banks are seeing volunteers disappear and supplies evaporate as COVID fears mount. All right, let's go back in time, my friends. Food and cash donations have sharply decreased, even as the logistics of feeding the hungry have become more complex. This is from the Washington Post back in March of last year. They say that people weren't donating anymore. There was no donations of foods or cash, and the volunteers were leaving. Well, they needed work and they needed food as well. Will this happen again this year, my friends? I think the answer is yes. According to disclose.tv, Dr. Fauci now says he doesn't expect normality until around Christmas. In January, he said it would be early autumn. And we've heard exactly that from other Democrats. They think that it's not going to be until winter that things can return to normal. Now, initially with the COVID lockdown, there was a bit of a panic. We're kind of past that now. Stores are getting their supplies. But what about inflation and what about inclement weather? Is it possible that the COVID lockdowns will exacerbate the lack of ability for people to get food? Perhaps. Is the stimulus package going to do anything about it? I think the answer is no. But here's what's going on from Vox. Congress is writing up Biden's stimulus plan. Here's what's in it. They say the stimulus checks, UI, I'm assuming what is that, universal income and a $15 minimum wage, the state of the House stimulus bill so far. I think it's not universal, but let's read. They say, yes, it is $1.9 trillion. The House of Representatives has been busy drafting its version of the budget reconciliation package, which includes $1,400 stimulus checks for those making up to $75,000, $400 expanded weekly unemployment insurance benefits. It's unemployment insurance, sorry. Through August 29th. And as it stands now, increasing the minimum wage to $15 by 2025 is going to get bad, man. Well, we're going to need a minimum wage increase. I'm not a big fan of the idea of the minimum wage, but there will be serious problems if we see massive inflation, especially around food, and people can't afford to do it. I think we're dangerously close to food riots. This aid also contains a restaurant rescue fund, money for reopening schools, and Democrats' long sought after funding for state and local governments, among other items. There it is. The mismanagement of many states will now be covered by the federal government. The biggest ticket items have been among them the most contentious. Though there was some discussion of further targeting for stimulus checks, the House proposal winds up pretty close to Biden's original plan. The $1,400 stimulus checks are for those making up to $75K a year, and the checks phase out at $100. The expanded weekly unemployment benefits are currently set at $300 and expire on March 14th. This bill expands them to $400 through August 29th and extends pandemic-related benefits for freelancers and contractors, along with extended state benefits for the same period that shaves 1 month of Biden's proposal. One big question mark in the House proposal is the federal minimum wage, which the bill would raise to $15 an hour by 2025. There are important questions as to whether a minimum wage hike can get through the reconciliation process and make it past the Senate parliamentarian. But for now, at least, Democrats are determined to fight for it. Our strategy is to make an aggressive case with the parliamentarian, one Democratic Senate aide said, noting Republicans were able to include work requirements for beneficiaries of social programs and open up Arctic wildlife refuge in past reconciliation bills. These are some pretty outlandish policies that were able to pass muster. $1,400. Is that going to be enough? The answer is no, obviously. You think that this check is going to be enough to stave off what is coming if we don't have people getting back to work? I don't think these politicians care. I think they just want to put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, essentially. They want to act like they're doing something, but the truth is we're still constrained. Unless we reopen the economies, this is all for what? For nothing. And now with this winter weather and this very serious storm that's hitting across the country, it's just a recipe for disaster. I've long advocated for reopening the economy, protecting the vulnerable, those with compromised immune systems and the elderly, allowing people to work. And they said no. And it was probably for political reasons. They didn't want to look bad. They didn't want to agree with Trump. And in the end, the result was a devastated economy and no support from the government. I think the mass printing of money is going to be a very devastating and bad thing. It's going to result in massive spikes in food prices that are coming. Food shortages, very likely because of the lockdown. We've already seen it. And now the Democrats, with all the power of the government, can't get the American people a $2,000 check. $2,000. To a lot of people, it's a lot of money. To a lot of people, it's more they've ever had at one time. But with the costs of everything going up, will it even really matter? I mentioned this a few weeks ago, something you can try. I needed to buy a tablet for work-related stuff. So I went on Amazon and I found a tablet. And I forgot. I, for some reason, just didn't get it. A day or so passed and I got a notification saying, this product in your shopping cart has seen a price increase. It went up like $130 in a couple days. Because what you need to understand about inflation is that it's going to cut your buying power, particularly with those overseas. That means imported goods will become much more expensive. That's exactly what I was reading in the other article about wheat from Russia. They produce wheat, they export it, we send food all over the world. Well, exports will become more expensive when the dollar can get you less, and then people in Russia don't want it that much. Now, between two people in the U.S., we can probably trade for our own food and the prices will remain somewhat the same, though it probably will still inflate because inflation will affect everybody. It's the imported goods where you're going to get hit the worst. And I don't know. Whether it's intentional or not, it's absolutely perfect in the end for the Great Reset. People are eating way less, consuming way less goods are being produced, people are traveling way less. All in all, it's probably great for the planet if you're one of these people who think that climate change is going to destroy the world in a few years, which it's not true. You know, science doesn't say that, but of course doesn't stop people like Greta Thunberg or AOC from saying it. I'm sure they're happy with what's going on. People with no kids, no family, no responsibility, nothing to lose. Yeah, they don't care if they go from -1 to -2 or just stay at the bottom. People who have fought hard and worked hard to provide for themselves and their families, now seeing it all stripped away, are probably not going to be too happy with it. If the standard of living is destroyed much too quickly, people will revolt and things will get bad. So I wonder if they're just doing things slow enough to stave off food riots. We got close last year. We got close. It didn't happen outright, though. So I wonder if in the end, people just finally say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Or will they just be complacent? I've long said that so long as people are fat and happy, they won't protest. They'll mind their own business and say, leave me alone. But what happens when people have no choice? Food. It's long been said that the primary catalyst for revolution would be the cost of food. If someone is working a full-time job and that full-time job does not provide them enough to eat, then eventually they're going to go nuts because you're dying. You're losing. If the cost of water, that's even worse because that you have even less time. People need water. I imagine there are a lot of people now who are going to see their income slashed, who are already struggling, and they're going to see no relief coming from government. And that's what's really worrying to me. We're sitting on a powder keg. Food shortages have already hit due to a storm. Hopefully this passes. The initial food shortages due to COVID have passed as well. But if the inflation is the next thing to come, then people are still going to be left without food. I hope you consider this. I'm not saying the world is going to end, but I think you should be prepared to a certain degree. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight. YouTube.com/TimCastIRL live at 8 p.m. We will see you all there. Thanks so much for hanging out. Come hang out, super chats, and don't forget to go to timcast.com, become a member for exclusive members-only content, and I'll see you all in the next segment.